My guest today is Professor Ricardo Hausmann. He is at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. He has been the Minister of Planning in Venezuela, the Chief Economist of the Inter-American Development Bank. And I'm going to ask him what he thinks the future of economic reform, especially taxation reform, might look like in a post-COVID world.
This is a big dark cloud in the sense that it will leave a lot of destruction in its wake. I would not expect many developing countries to get to 2019 levels of income by 2025 or later. I mean, this thing might deteriorate into a debt crisis, currency crisis, banking crisis. And what the better countries are able to do is they're able to borrow a lot of money during the pandemic. They are running very large deficits because tax revenues have collapsed, because health expenditures have to go up, because the whole epidemiological effort has to go up, and they need to make social transfers, both to help people cope, but also to make it feasible for them to abide by the containment strategies, the lockdowns, and so on. And they need to also help companies so that they don't go under. So all of that translates into huge deficits. The countries that are not well macroeconomically are unable to finance those huge deficits, and that generates another set of problems on their own. But whatever the country, this is going to be a spectacular collapse in output and a spectacular deterioration of the fiscal accounts, the accumulation of public debt. And the question going forward is going to be, who's going to pay for the state? Who's going to pay for this expanded public debt? And I think that countries will have to rethink the structure of taxation because they'll now have the burden, they'll have to pay for the fact that for 3 years they were fighting COVID and so on, and that created an enormous cost to the economy, and now they have to pay for that. That's going to force them to revisit the tax structure. Now, the way the tax structure has been organized in most countries is that they have been overly reliant on things like the value-added tax, taxes on consumption, and labor taxes. So they have significant indirect taxes on labor, whether it's to contribute to Social Security or unemployment compensation, or a bunch of things like that, and the personal income tax. And in the personal income tax, it's interesting to know that they tax labor income at a higher rate than capital income. Essentially, taxation falls on labor and falls mainly on formal labor. And the reason why they do it is because they say, look, if we tax capital, it's going to flee out of the country. So I'd rather have very low tax on capital and have capital in the country than try to impose higher taxes on capital, and capital flees the country. That's the current equilibrium. I think that equilibrium is not going to last. It's going to be challenged. And the solution to it is made easier by one thing that has been happening in the rich countries, in the OECD countries, that they have decided that they want to be able to tax capital much more too. So, and they tax global taxation. So they tax you on whatever you make worldwide. So they have been enhancing their information sharing of what the citizen of one country owns in another country. If developing countries were to collaborate with that effort, tell the rich countries, if you want, the developed countries, what assets do citizens of their country have in those countries, in exchange for information about their own citizens, okay? That will allow for them to adopt taxation on global income, and that will allow them to raise capital taxation. That may allow them to rebalance to have lower labor taxation, maybe a more progressive tax structure, and maybe one that will generate less informality.
If you were advising leaders in developing countries, what would you say to them? Are there things that need to be done immediately? Are there things that can wait?
They need to think hard about their epidemiological strategy. And that is hard to do because it's an area where we are incredibly ignorant. It's amazing the things that we know that we don't know. And that we are designing, epidemiological strategies like lockdowns and things like that in ignorance of how people are getting infected. And they need to figure out the economic consequences of that strategy and face them. And that implies having a government that is able to help the economy through this very crazy period. And that implies having the fiscal space to do that. And that implies being able to borrow. But that needs you to be able to tell capital markets that things will be okay in the medium term. So the tax reforms I've been talking about, you want them for the medium term, but you may want to announce them or implement them now because it's the right signal to capital markets so that today you can borrow against that future cash flow that you're setting up. So I think that while ideally you want the cash flows to be taxing the recovery after COVID, you need a credible signal that you're good for the money now because you need the money now to manage the crisis.